What's the weirdest thing that ever happened to you that made you think that God was real? And I'm not talking about believing in some kind of universal energy.
Okay, this is going to take a little bit of time, so I'm going to try to talk really, really fast. So, I grew up in the church, and I kind of always believed, but I went to a gospel filled, spirit filled church, and they used to have revival services like all the time. And if you've never been to one of those, so people would pray, people would get healed, they would fall under the spirit, the minister would go to touch them, and it was powerful. And I grew up in that, and as I got older, I had dreams, and I actually was filled with the Holy Spirit. I got my prayer language when I was like 9 years old. And then in my teens, I started going through some really rough stuff. Like, people at school would make fun of me, call me Little Miss Innocent. I had friends, so like I wasn't a complete outcast. But people always kind of thought I was a little, I was very into God. But um, I lost my grandmother, and she that kind of like spiraled me. I had some just other crazy things happen that started to really shake my faith. Plus, I started getting interested in other religions, and I started looking at all these different world religions. But the biggest, weirdest thing that happened to me was I went to a fair one night, and with some friends. And while we were at the fair, there was actually a hypnotist. And the hypnotist, we went in, we saw the show. They had people on the stage. He would tell them, you're going to do this or that, and they'd go back, and he would say a trigger word, and they'd jump up and do whatever crazy thing, and they'd look totally confused. And after the show, me and my friends were all standing around, and we're like, that's so fake. Those people were like planted in the audience. There's no way that can be real. So all of a sudden, the hypnotist, comes out from the shadows. It was like something out of a weird movie where the guy comes from the shadows, and he's like, all of a sudden he's standing next to me and my friend. He's like, so you don't believe it was real? And she's like, no. And he looks at me. He's like, you don't believe it was real? And I was like, no. He's like, come to the next show and I'll prove to you that it's real. Okay, so we did. Now, granted, I was like 19 years old, and so I went in there in this big tent, and he asked for volunteers, and he picked all these volunteers, and he pulled me up, and I'm sitting on stage, and we're sitting in chairs, and he's like telling each person, he's like, I'm taking you into a light trance. And then he starts saying, you're going to feel this. And he got to me, and the last girl, he's like, you're really, really cold. Now, I could hear everything he was saying, and my body like reacted. Like, I started feeling cold. And he's like, you guys are trying to get next to each other to keep warm. And me and this girl were literally getting next to each other to keep warm. And I could hear what he was saying, but it was just like, my body just did it. So then he brings us out of this trance, and he brings me up in the front of the stage. And this he did not do in the last show. So he did this with me, and this was not in the last show. He said, he looked at me, he's like, I'm going to prove to you it's real now. He said, I'm putting you under, and he goes through, and he's like, and the thing is, he told me beforehand I had to be open to it. It would only work if I was open to it, and I did not know what I was opening myself up to. So he starts to put me under a trance, and he's like, you're going to go deeper, and I could hear his words, but it was like my eyes were closed, but I could see everything going on in the tent. And then all of a sudden, it was like the roof of the tent lifted up, and it was just like I felt myself leaving my body and getting pulled into this darkness. And I was floating, and I just felt myself getting pulled into this darkness, and I felt terrified. All of a sudden, this fear came over me, and I snapped myself out of it. I actually believe it was the Holy Spirit that snapped me out of it, because it was not of God. And he's standing there in front of me, and he's like right in front of my face, and he's got this smirk, and he's like, you got scared, didn't you? And I just shook my head. He's like, you can go sit down. Now, the reason I remember, because he told everyone else after he would get done, I'm going to bring you out of the trance, and you're not going to remember. And they would come out of the trance, and they wouldn't remember. But I didn't get that far, because, like I said, I believe God, the Holy Spirit, helped pull me out of that, pull me back. But that just kind of messed with my head for a little bit. So then, over the next few weeks, I start reading more into hypnotism, and I start thinking about like how hypnotism works. And I started thinking, like, I grew up in this church, there's music, they're laying hands on people, and I started wondering, God, was this all just hypnotism? Was everything I believed, is it true? Is it true? And I started to really question, and I'd already lost my grandmother. I'd been going through a lot of things. I had to leave my home. There's family stuff going on. I had moved in with a friend of mine. 19 years old, like I was, just without going into a lot of my testimony, I'm just gonna I want to stick with this, but it was a very dark time in my place in my life. So I go to church after a few weeks, and I'm there was a pastor visiting, and this was a fairly large church. It sat about 1,000 people, and it was at capacity. And they did an altar call at the end, and I was praying. I was like, Lord, I need to know that you're real. And I mean, I really wanted to know, like, Lord, I need to know that everything I believed my whole life is not a lie. I need to know that you're real, that you're here with me, that everything that I've been through, everything that I've endured is not for nothing. And at the altar call, and I had it in my head because of reading that it takes like words, touch, like it all has an effect. And so I had it in my head that if someone touched me, it wasn't real. I didn't tell anybody this. But I mean, I was crying. Tears were streaming down my face. Like, I was just like, God, I need to know you're real. I want to know you're real. And I mean, my heart was broken. I was not being, it was not in a arrogant way. It was in just a desperate, like, seeking him, like, God, I just need to know you're there, that you're real. And so I get to the front, and there's a whole line of people waiting for prayer, and I go to the end of the line. And after I'm there, I think one or two people walked up after me, and I put my hands up, and I'm praying, and I've got my eyes closed, and I'm like, God, just please show me you're real. I need to know you're real. And all of a sudden, I got a vision, and it was like could see the church, even though my eyes were closed. I could see everything, the platform, the church, everything clearly. And also the roof opened up, and I saw this bright light. And then this bright light just engulfed me in this just love and warmth. And it was just like, I just felt peace and love. And I can't understand. I've never felt peace and love like that ever. It was just so intense. And then all of a sudden I saw two figures coming out of the light, and it was like angels, and then one went to either side of me. And then I opened my eyes, and I was laying on the floor. And I'm laying there, and it felt like a long time had passed. And I looked up, and people were reaching down to help me up, and I looked at them, I said, who caught me? Because I felt no pain. I didn't even know I was on the floor. I didn't even know I'd fallen down. I thought I was still standing up. And they looked at me, they said, no one caught you. You were just standing there, and then all of a sudden you just went down. You just fell straight backwards. But I felt no pain. And I really believe the two figures were angels that caught me, because I felt no pain. Did not feel myself hit the floor. And I knew, because it was the complete opposite of what had happened with the hypnotist. Nobody had touched me. Nobody had prayed for me. When they actually got to me, and I was crying, and I was praying, thank God, and asked me what I needed prayer for, I actually said, I'm good. God already answered my prayer. And I have not ever denied, I can never deny that he is real, because he says, seek and you will find. And he showed up. When I cried out to him, he showed up. He showed up. And I can tell you many times in my life that I haven't had that intense of an encounter, but I just know, and just little things, the way he provides, the way he's always provided for me, the way he's always watched out, the way with my kids growing up, when I didn't know, he always made a way. He may not have given me everything I wanted, but he's always given me peace, and I've always known that he's there, and he's got my back. And yeah, I could never, ever deny him. I walked through more things through that. I've had to learn a lot of life lessons. But that was real.